John McConnon here with the residential purchase agreement. Let me see, I'll just pop up here. I have no idea what I look like because I just did it. I just went through this and realized that it was not on air, so I'm going to do it again quickly. So let me see if it'll go back out to the camera. No, that's not it. I don't even know how to get out to the camera right now. Screen share. Okay, that's me, John McConnon here. I'm an attorney and a real estate broker. I guess it's probably my screen that's me. I'm hoping. I don't know why those things behind me are crooked. But anyway, I'm about to go over the California Residential Purchase Agreement. It's a final draft right now that I have. It's going to be the 2014 California RPA. We're going to go over it quickly. There's a first draft. There are some things that are going to require a more specific interview or more specific webinar going over the clauses. This is just to take a first look. I am now going to look over here and do a little screen share. There it is. I'm going to click on it. You should be looking at it now. I'm going to put it over here, and I'm just doing it. We're going to go through this quickly. I like the layout. The first thing we notice, it says 1114. It's the right name, California Resident Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. Date prepared by. Awesome. I shared this on an interview when I did a Google Hangout with a homeowner, and many times I've had clients and sometimes agents ask me what's the proper date for the addendum, because we had a date and then we have the execution dates on the back. So now it's clearly we're going to have execution dates on the back and a date prepared here, and they can frequently differ, and hopefully people will know the difference. Most people probably already did, but now almost everyone should. This first part, I like the layout. I hope the layout stays this way in zip forms. I like this much better than the sort of more center justified setup. This is clear. It reminds me when I was, well, I guess I still am an attorney in Florida and just not licensed to talk about it. I went to Florida. I looked at these agreements a lot for 2 or 3 years because I was a real estate investor. While I was there, I passed the bar. Their layout looked a lot more like this. I thought it was very friendly and accessible in terms of going through it and reading it quickly. And I think this block format I like. I hope that Zip Forms adopts it, but we'll see. This paragraph 2, agency disclosure, always a big deal. Hard to believe that we're allowed to represent both sides as realtors in California. Everyone knows different states have different, I consider them fictions. But, you know, I think if we are exercising our duties well and disclosing to both sides, not playing one against the other, we can get it done. I consider that more like a transaction broker that they have in Florida than here. But if we educate the parties well, I think it can be done. And sometimes it is the benefit of the seller if the agent's representing the buyer. Sometimes it's not. The real tricky part is when, you know, someone's representing more than a few buyers, more than 2 separate parties, 3 separate parties, buyers, because now who is that agent trying to dutifully represent? So that can be a problem. But here it lays it all out, does the disclosures, explains it, and I think it's very clear. Listing agent is working with the listing people exclusively or both. Buyer's agent, before it was buried in the middle of the paragraph. I think it's much better this way. Financing terms. I think the note here is that all parties, most of the time, I mean, there may be reasons why you want a broker to have your deposit money, but here I think the idea of taking a picture of it and that the buyer is going to present it to escrow is the way to go. And I'm sorry, my voice is going. I've been sipping on my soda with caffeine in it, and now this is the second time I'm doing this. So I feel like it's getting a little rumbly. Instead of, maybe I can bring it down lower and it won't get rumbly. I guess that's why people on radio try to talk deeper. Loans, first loan, second loan, VA. The VA one with the mandatory clause is interesting. Buyers and sellers need to know the advantages and disadvantages of working with a VA or FHA party. A lot of it has to do with when repairs have to be made and which repairs have to be made. They can be tricky. You definitely want to work with lenders who know what they're doing in those circumstances. Professional advice, I think, is important if you're trying to do this without a real estate agent or a lawyer, and you're thinking of working with an FHA or VHA loan or VA loan. Nothing unusual about the purchase prices that I saw on first glance. That's all subject. I mean, I have not looked at these long. This is my first look. I'm sure when I read the materials, review it again, compare it, and we'll do one of these where we're comparing and contrasting clauses. I'm sure we'll get more in-depth understanding. This is just my first look, and it looks like in the loan terms, this is set up to show that the sellers are relying on the idea, whether it's all cash or the loans, and you can't get out as easily if you're a buyer by saying, "Whoops." It really seems like they are putting the onus on the buyers to be truthful about whether they're really going all cash or they have alternative financing lined up. They can't really like say, "Oh, well, I'm all cash," then hook up on the alternative financing and say, "Oh, well, I can't get the financing, I'm out." The car seems to be shutting that down, and before I know whether it's really shut down, we're going to have to do an in-depth webinar on the disclosures, how you shut them down through the process, what the alternatives are, and what the breaches mean in terms of actually getting the deposit back, because it's set up to make it look stronger, and the deposit clause really looks like they're saying, that's what the liquidated damages clause, and when we increase it, you got to sign a separate liquidated damages clause. So it seems to me, my sense, and I'm doing this off the experience I've had with the other contract and how things are done, my sense is they're trying to put a little more teeth into this. Now, I will follow this up. We'll compare and contrast them in the next video. But if I'm reading this for the first time, I'm saying, well, these clauses seem to be putting some teeth into these contracts for the sellers. But when we'll see in the end if they're sort of, I don't know if elusive would be the right word, if they're an illusion or not when we go in more depth. But that's something to be on guard for, and I'm sure when CAR has some webinars on their own, they'll go into that more in depth. I like the way the covered items in the sale are done here, specifically the stove, because that was an issue, and refrigerators. So here in the listing agreement, it's good to get the sellers to really disclose and talk about it ahead of time so that it transfers over here nicely and then it all is consistent. But here it's very clear to the buyer and the seller what's going to be included or not, at least the way I read it for the first time. So I think that is commendable. The agreement's still looking good, in other words. Seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. If the seller has a right to remain in close of possession after close of escrow, the parties are advised to sign a separate occupancy agreement, such as car form SIP, because this happens. Lenders don't close on time. People want to move in. The moving truck's on the way. You got to be prepared to do this. And I think sometimes it helps if things are discussed ahead of time about how the sellers will be protected. But again, liquidated damages clause can require, should require attorney reviews. And even then, like when it comes up in my practice, I wonder if we're going to be able to make it airtight, because agreements still depend on the good faith of the parties. So we've got those issues. Sellers need to be apprised of the fact that it's not always easy to do a, let's say the seller's holding over, hasn't closed. How are you going to get the seller out? Well, first of all, you want to make sure you hire an experienced attorney in those circumstances, because the court system really are set up to help out people in possession of the property, usually renters. So you want to make sure that it's done well. So if buyers or potential buyers wind up staying in the property and haven't closed, it becomes an issue. And if it has closed and you've got leases, leasebacks, and things like that, well, I think here we're seeing that, yeah, you've got to pay attention to the forms and do it right. There's good disclosure sections. This thing about the AVID might be still an issue, because if you talk to car legal, AVIDs are not mandatory, at least for the listing agents. Here they're sort of saying the buyers have to do the AVID or the, I think it's the TDS. So be aware of those issues, realtors, um, and know that even if you're on the selling side, you're paying attention, and you know you don't need an agent. A lot of the buyers agents, the big companies, the transaction coordinators are all expecting it. So be prepared to explain that you're just doing the TDS, that you've already done it. You don't want to go through and go over it and do useless, forms where you're just saying, oh, it looks good, or, disclosing every little defect like a lot of people do, because, I don't think paint defects are the things that are supposed to be talked about here. Buyers agents may have difference of opinion, but I think, the point of these forms is that realtors are getting out of liability, and you might as well do it the right way if that's how you're using these forms. For buyers and sellers, these forms are good because people know how to read them. There are other forms, but people know how to read them. They're going to cost you less time in transactions. As a seller, I know a lot of luxury sellers don't use these forms because they have lawyers and they don't want to give as many outs to the buyers, and they do want to have the money go hard, and that's a good thing, but make sure you're working with really skilled people. And know, well, I mean, you already know sometimes, there's a whole reason why luxury properties bring lawyers in, and probably should. It's frequently, the parties I find frequently know each other more often in luxury deals, or the people know each other. Maybe the attorney knows the people. The parties helping the people do these deals that only a few people in the world can actually do. There's frequently other forms used and lawyers. So just know that there's a reason it's being done that way, but these forms are designed to encourage buyers to get involved. If the buyers don't like their inspections, they can get away, which will bring us to the next point. Not a lot of people realize, or not a lot of realtors seem to explain to people that these purchases are done as is. They're as is, so the seller, the advantage of the seller is that the buyers can go in and they know if they don't like the inspections, they're out if they do it the right way with their buyers. They're as is to avoid a lot of liability. So basically, if you come down here to, where was it? Final verification. No, that's too soon. Condition of the property, title investing, buyer notice, cancellation deposit is a condition of the property. Unless otherwise, so this is paragraph 11, unless otherwise agreed in writing, the property is sold as is. And then it goes into what the buyer can conduct investigations, and the seller should cooperate in the investigations. And in the end, there's a review of the property to make sure that it was in the condition it was at the time of the agreement, plus whatever changes were requested and agreed to. So we'll go over that. I think that in and of itself will deserve another webinar. We'll do those. I know eventually I'm going to go over every paragraph with people. Hopefully we'll do it in on my websites or here on YouTube. But in the meantime, the first thing was to take this first look. Know there's a complex interaction between the ability to get to the deposits and the cancellations and doing things properly. We'll go over that format in depth, and maybe even the next one. Here is the clauses that protect the brokers. Basically, here saying brokers have almost no duties and almost no responsibility and no special skills. The buyer, when he's walking through, probably should disclose. I don't even know. I mean, in the end, it's, did you see a crack in the wall or the foundation? Should everyone have seen it? Yes. And so the buyer discloses it? Yes. Basically, it's saying the agent shouldn't be hiding anything that they're aware of, especially if they're aware of it and the buyer isn't. And it's material. The representative capacity clause in 19 lays it out pretty clearly that if people are signing these things for someone else, they've got some paperwork to get it done properly and disclosures in a timely manner. There's a point in here about the parties agree to work with escrow instructions, the general provisions. Now, those escrow instructions frequently cancel out a lot of what goes on in these agreements. So I think it's important that if you're working with an experienced agent, they know what their providers do. They know how the contracts work. If you're doing it on your own, you probably want to get a copy of what those escrow instructions look like ahead of time. And even then, my advice to people selling their own, because I once did that, it's what prompted me to become a real estate agent in the first place, even if you're introducing, even if you've got the parties there and they're willing to buy, large percentage of the buyer pool wants to be protected, wants an agent involved. So you might work out a deal with a lawyer or an agent where they're willing to help the buyer make sure that the disclosures are done, the buyer feels comfortable, and the other thing is there's so much paperwork. There are reasons. Okay, now maybe your listing agent's not worth 3%. Maybe you don't think the buyer's agent's worth 3% in total, but I think the listing agent is worth something because there's a lot of paperwork to get done. And the buyer's agents make the buyers feel more comfortable. They frequently help them with the financing. They can help them with the escrow and title and making sure they're using the right, professionals who can help get the job done. Because let me tell you, some title companies block deals all the time. Some escrow companies don't know what they're doing. Some escrow companies, you wonder where the money is, and it should be protected by title, by the title people, because they frequently do. But if you're putting up big money, they need to be protected. So there is a reason, maybe not to pay listing agents the full amount if you're competent. But I'll say this: I was competent. I've done these contracts for, I used to help realtors, commercial realtors. I've been looking at these contracts for 20 years, but I've only been a realtor for 10. But when I was selling it on my own, I had the people on my property. But when I put it on the market, a few weeks later, all of a sudden, someone who was talking to me about paying $40,000 less, but wouldn't pull the trigger, had to pay $40,000 more, and did, because we had multiple buyers at that higher level. So, there is a buyer pool that's sophisticated enough that will be happy to close at a fair market value or a good deal. But there's also a big part of the buyer pool that may be willing to pay more when they feel comfortable being represented a buyer's agent. So a homeowner looking at these things should consider all that. It's important to have the parties. It's important to understand the contracts. It may be important to the buyer to be working with skilled professionals, and it may be intelligent to work with buyer's agents to some degree, or work with a listing agent who can do both and make buyers feel comfortable. I know that a flat fee attorney realtor may be well worth it to most sellers, as would be sometimes in the seller's interest to offer money to the buyer's agents, so the buyer pool gets broadened out. And some buyer's agents sometimes work with people who are relocating and have to buy in a weekend or two, and those are usually motivated buyers. And also independent of agents, letting the word get out in the neighborhood to help find the motivated potential buyers who might be willing to pay fair market value or more is part of a good marketing plan. So anyway, I'm trying to put this presentation together to help everybody, agents, homeowners, and take a look at it myself. And we will be going over these clauses more in depth, but that's the philosophy here. Here's the remedies again. Any clause added by the parties specifying a remedy, such as a release or forfeiture of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable. So if you're trying to make the money go hard for failure of buyer to complete the purchase in violation of this agreement, shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfied statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the Civil Code. So if you're a seller trying to make the money go hard, that's why you bring lawyers into it. You go over the forms very quickly. It's difficult to do properly to make money go hard. I've seen lots of ingenious ways to do it. You should be aware of all of the different ways and the different points. There's a liquidated damages clause where if you're increasing the deposit, then you have to use, I think there's a car form. Yeah, the car RID right there. Those are important things for people to know. Mediation arbitration, it looks like we've got the two clauses again, so it's still important to have them both signed or not signed. I believe it will be the case, we find out after we review all these things. We have assignment. You can't, well, such consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. This may, I'd have to go back and check this out with the other agreement. A lot of wholesalers are sort of practicing real estate without licenses. When they do some of these things, in my opinion, I'm sure they don't. I don't have anything against the wholesaling business. I just like them to make sure that people aren't getting tricked. But, I flip homes, so, if you're a wholesaler, I understand why you're doing it. I sometimes, I'd like to have one at a time. I don't always. Sometimes we get up to two. But it's a nice business when you can help people sell their property when it needs work, or if people need to have their property fixed up a little before they sell, that's a good business. I understand it. But here, the wholesalers, the question for them is going to be what's unreasonably withheld if they try to go sell a contract. And also, have they locked it down? When they lock it down for 90 days, should there have been money paid for the option? So yeah, again, it's an interesting clause. We can discuss more in depth. Agreement means this document and any incorporated addenda signed by all parties collectively, forming the binding agreement between the parties. All terms and conditions and addenda checked and signed are incorporated into this agreement. Here we have the representatives and the execution, where the representatives are doing it, and then they have to get disclosures or addendums out in time. The parties sign. I like the way it's laid out. Here's where we see real estate brokers. I'll just read this. This makes sense for the realtors out there. If listing broker and cooperating broker are not both participants of the MLS or reciprocal MLS in which the property is offered for sale, then compensation must be specified in a separate written agreement. The CAR Form CBC, Declaration of License and Tax, CR Form DLT, may be used to document that tax reporting will be required or that exemption exists. This agreement, it says earlier that brokers are not part of the agreement, yet they have this little form sitting there to avoid confusion. So anyway, that's our first look. This is John McConnon. I'm an attorney and realtor with favoriterealestate.com and favoriterealestate.net. I will be happy to provide a link to where I downloaded this agreement, and we will have future webinars on this. If you got any questions, I'd love, this is interesting stuff for me. As the lawyer in me gets to be practiced. All the time I'm answering lawyer questions, but actually reading contracts keeps the mind sharp. I'd be happy to go over questions. Homeowners, if you got a question, give me a call or find these on my websites and put the questions in. Thanks once again, John McConnon. Now, I seem to be back live. I'm going to hang up now. Look at that. It's kind of warm today. My hand, that's, it's a little red from holding the mouse. I don't even know why I was holding the mouse, but we're going to call it a day now. Thanks.